Welcome to A Court of Transformation and Awakening. I'm Lorrie Gray.
And I'm Amanda Grace Harrison.
And today we are discussing A Court of Thorns and Roses, Chapter 18. Yay! Okay, so after a kind of intense, sad chapter, we get to have a...
Finally, some fantasy romance happening.
We're finally getting into some of the romance stuff. I find myself in these kinds of chapters just like smiling like to myself in a way that's kind of awkward, and my family laughs at me, but they're fun. They're fun. Okay, so how are we doing here? So we wake up, so thankfully the dead fairy's gone. Everything's cleaned up. And he says that her painting supplies aren't going to arrive until tomorrow, so he's like, let's go for a ride. But I love this here. Is like, was he rambling? It's like he seems a little uncomfortable. He seems a little nervous, which is very endearing to me. And they take off for the day. And they come to... So I love this. I couldn't come up with any words when we arrived. And I knew that even if I had been able to paint it, nothing would have done it justice. It wasn't simply that it was the most beautiful place I'd ever been to, or that it filled me with both longing and mirth, but it just seemed right. I love this, as if the colors and lights and patterns of the world had come together to form one perfect place, one true bit of beauty. After last night, it was exactly where I needed to be.
Oh, that's nice.
It is nice. It is nice. And so they're hanging out in this beautiful glen.
And it's the three of them.
The three of them.
That would go for a ride. And
yeah.
Rode out to this beautiful place. Lucian is there. And they're having like a little picnic. We sat atop a grassy knoll. Dandelion fluff drifting by.
I love that he's like, we brought a blanket. And she was like, no way. I never felt grass like it. I certainly wasn't going to ruin the experience by sitting on a blanket. And then this part's funny. It's like rushed whispers were exchanged behind me. And before I could turn around to investigate, Tamla took a seat. It's like, you can just imagine. Oh my gosh. Does it remind you of like junior high? It's like, you can do it. You can do it. You can do it. You can do it.
Sit next to the girl.
Oh my gosh. I had a moment like that. Oh my gosh. When was this? Okay, what a moment to relive on a podcast. Gosh, I think I was actually a senior in high school. This may have been the summer before college. And I went on a date, or I was supposed to be going on a date. It was some kid from like another town who I didn't like know very well. And I think it was kind of like this, like there was like a third wheel along for the date. So it was like the whole thing, like looking back, like one of the most awkward dates of my life, like super weird. The whole time. And I think it was kind of like the dude chickened out at the last moment and like needed a wingman, right? Kind of thing.
Boys.
And then it was really awkward, and it gets to the end of the night, and I think he was like, are you gonna kiss her? You're gonna kiss her? And I'm like, okay, this is really funny. So obviously he's not. And then still tried, like right there, like with his friend. I'm like,
wow.
Oh my word. I'm like, okay, go back and repeat 7th grade, like, because this is not a thing that happens when we're 18 years old. Like, what is happening here? This is so weird. And I'm like, and so of course I was like caught off guard, because I'm like, what? Did you really just do that? Like, on like a dare because somebody said to? Oh my gosh. But this reminded me of that, like, go do it. Go sit me on the blanket. Go sit by her. Go sit by her. Oh my gosh. Thank goodness somebody's there to shove him in the right direction, Tamlin. Such a funny moment.
Just a Glen.
Just a Glen. But we start having a little bit of like fun banter where he's like, do you like it? Yes. Okay. That's it. Yes. Would you like me to grovel with gratitude for bringing me here, High Lord? The cereal told you nothing important, did it? Okay, which leads to
that smile of his sparked something bold in my chest. Go ahead. This is Lorrie's.
This is my favorite line. He also said that you like being brushed, and if I'm a clever girl, I might train you with treats. And like,
we have a moment of true laughter here. Tamlin tips his head to the sky and roars with laughter. Despite herself, she lets out a soft laugh. I believe this is her first laugh of the entire book. Here we are in chapter 18, and she's finally laughed.
And of course, Lucian, you made a joke, Feyre. I might die of surprise. I'm like, But
Feyre made a funny. Yay! Feyre's feeling better.
yeah, but we start to okay, not giving anything this away, but this is there's later where we learn that Feyre is a person who loves some good banter.
Yes. Does she ever?
If you've read book 2, all we're going to say is banter.
Banter,
if you've
banter,
not
banter.
read book 2, just know that what we see here is she loves a good little banter like this, and it's so fun to watch. Like I love like reading scenes like this where things are a little bit lighter, but something about, again, that's one of those things where I'm like, it's funny, it's not that funny, but whenever I read it, I don't know if it was because the first chunk of the book was so serious,
We're so ready for comic relief.
or if I was just like in a mood when I read it. It was one of those things that just I laughed like way too hard for way too long, and it still like tickles me like to no end for whatever reason. And then she's still her, so then Lucian, okay, like, yeah, you made a joke. You don't want to know what the serial said about you.
And then Tamlin, I'd pay good money to hear what the Zuriel thinks of Lucian.
I love it.
A cork popped, followed by the sounds of Lucian chugging the bottle's contents, chuckling and muttered, "Brushed." So good.
You can just see
It's
it.
going to be an inside joke for them
it's
for a
gonna
long
be
time.
Brushed.
Bit of a butter knife situation. By the way, there was a butter knife that flew off the table last night at dinner, and I
Was there?
It was a butter knife, and the kids now know what I'm talking about. That's my ACOTAR inside joke. It's all about the butter knives.
Oh, it's so funny. Oh, so I love this. So we're starting to have some lighter moments. Okay, well then we have this whole scene where they go swim in a pool of literal starlight.
Sparkling starlight water. What the heck?
Which is funny. Like this
Is starlight.
Like-
It doesn't just look like starlight. It
it is, and it's kind of like, can you explain it? He's like, man, I don't know. Nobody ever explained it. Like, we just live in a land where that's a thing.
Yeah. It is magic. This is my favorite haunt as a boy, so we're getting to see a bit of Tamlin's childhood.
And how old he is, right? So a little bit of like really understanding that he's, that he was a boy a very long time ago, and if he'd been a boy during the war, she starts to get this idea of how much older he
For
is.
500 years old, basically.
Okay, now this next part, gets a little bit more serious, but I thought was really good. So we go into learning some of Lucian's backstory, and he tells us this. Oh my gosh, a devastating story of him falling in love with a fairy who his father considered inappropriate and executed her in front of him. Which, I mean, we have not met Lucian's dad yet, but we already hate him. Oh my
Don't
goodness.
like his brothers too much either. And interesting that in the way things run there, that the strongest of the offspring inherits the title, not the eldest. So it didn't matter that he was the youngest. He could have still been in line for the title if he'd wanted to. He didn't want to.
He didn't want to. Definitely not. But this was, so we learned this story, and this actually relates into a bit of what we were talking about in the last episode about understanding. Where after she hears this, and Tamlin kind of follows up with, his father never apologized. He says, but he's never forgotten what they did to her or what his brothers tried to do to him, even if he pretends that he has. And she has this moment where she's like, it didn't quite excuse everything Lucian had said and done to me, but I understood now. I could understand the walls and barriers he had no doubt constructed around himself. And, she had this moment, and this was what we were talking about before, that like, the things that he did that weren't okay are still not okay. But now she has this context of like, okay, somebody who experienced everything that he did, if like the people closest to you, your father, your brothers betrayed you in that way, if you had lost love, like, makes sense to me that this person would have some barriers up. Yeah. And then here I'm the stranger. Yeah. And the behavior still wasn't okay, but I understand it in that way. And how much more, again, calling back to the last one, it's like forgiveness sometimes I do think is overrated, but this sense of like, I understand why you behave the way that you do. It doesn't excuse it, but I get it. Like that there is, I think, something more powerful in that than the forgiveness itself.
Yeah.
And it's honestly like, it's more words, but it's the idea of like, do you forgive or not forgive? It's like, man, that's just like too black and white. It's like, I understand and it's not okay. Yeah. There's just such like such a healthier space to that. Anyway, so I just loved that point, and I thought it was such a really good moment there for their relationship.
Yeah, and then Farrah makes another joke. It's not a terribly funny one, but the fact that she is a miracle sent from the cauldron, 2 jokes in one day, because he says legend claims that if you drink the starlight pool, the water from the starlight pool, you'll be happy until your last breath. And Farrah says, I don't think that entire pool would be enough for me.
Yeah. And he's like, well, maybe we both need some. Yeah, so 2 jokes. And
what would be enough to make you happy? I love that question.
I do too.
And the starlight danced in his eyes as he asked it. Good one, Sarah J. Maas.
Right. Yeah, but she, so I mean, I think he's trying to be kind of playful here, and at the same time, like she kind of goes to a serious answer where, she's blushing because I think she recognizes he's kind of flirting a little bit, which she's not super comfortable with. But then she goes to a really serious answer of like, I don't know. And she's like, it was true. I'd never given that sort of thing any thought beyond getting my sister safely married off and having enough food for me and my father and time to learn to paint. And this is that repetition of the same dream that we've seen over and over again. And it was like, this is as far as I let myself dream. And I don't even know. And that's saying, I don't think this is even like what would truly make her happy. It was just as far as she'd ever let herself go. Like, this isn't even true happiness. This is just less suffering.
Yeah.
It's like, it's the most that she can imagine of like getting by. And like when you've been in survival mode for so long, it's like, this is as far as I can see. I can't even see to true happiness. Like, that's way too far out there for me to see. But I love her honest moment with herself of like, if I'm really honest, I don't know, because I've never considered it.
I don't know.
Oh my goodness. Okay, next moment here. This is one of my favorites. By the way, we have a fly that is attacking us on this episode. So if you hear like random,
kill it. Oh, sorry.
I was just trying to kill a fly. After this, we're gonna zap it. Okay, but this part. So he starts making jokes here about like what would make you happy, and he's like, okay, what about the ringing of bluebells or a ribbon of sunshine or a garland of moonlight? And he's grinning wickedly, right? And he has this moment, and she recognizes that he's trying to get from her, and she's like, so what, hold on, right before this, here's the thing, High Lord, foolery was more like it, but she says, no, I wouldn't let him have the satisfaction of embarrassing me. I'd had enough of that lately, enough of that girl encased in ice and bitterness. So I gave him a sweet smile, doing my best to pretend that my stomach wasn't flipping over itself. A swim sounds delightful. Oh, right, because right before this, he'd asked if she wanted to swim. We should have said that before.
I can't find that either.
I don't even know where it happened, but
I don't even know if he does.
Where does he say this? Hold on. He totally had to. Why are we missing this?
Well, that's what, when I was rereading, I was like, what? I would not jump straight to, I'm not going to let him embarrass me with his jokes. I'm going to take off my clothes and jump in the water. I was a little like, I wouldn't have done that, Farrah.
Okay, why are we not finding this? He totally had to, he asked her to swim somewhere. Where is this happening? Oh, I think it's way back. Okay, there we go. So it's back on page 159.
Oh,
we skipped over it because we were big in other things. He's like, okay, so what is it? I don't know. No one ever explained. When I continued gaping at the pool, he laughed and drawing away my attention, only for me to find him unbuttoning his tunic.
Oh, that's right.
Jump in, he said, the invitation in his eyes. Okay, a swim, unclothed, alone, with a High Lord. I shook my head, falling back a step. And anyway, so they had this whole thing where this is way back here. So he's unbuttoning. There's bare muscled golden skin beneath. How did we skip this? And then because then she goes into, okay, what is this place? And then we have this whole tangent. And so now we're coming back
she's
to...
like just kind of trying to deflect the moment. Like, oh
Right,
no,
right,
he's
right.
taking clothes off and he wants to jump in the water. So let's talk instead.
Yeah. And then after this, and I think it's significant that like at first she's like, okay, I'm going to step back.
Yeah.
And then we have this conversation about what's going to make her happy and her realizing we haven't explored it. Because I think that this is one of those things where I thought it was significant because we start to see her making a conscious choice to step away from who she's been into who she actually wants to be. And she, you know, it's not even like I have this clear picture of what I want. I haven't really considered that. I just know I don't want to be this person that's like bitter or in ice. And I don't want to be a person that is too embarrassed to take action. You know, she doesn't even know yet what she does want, but she knows what she doesn't. And I think that's a fun, like it's a good starting place. I think that's where most of us start, where it's like, I'm not quite sure what I want. I just know it's not this. Yeah. And can I just simply take some action that's in a different direction? But so she, and I love this, I gave him a sweet smile, doing my best to pretend that my stomach wasn't flipping over itself. So it actually is. She's freaking out, but she's like, I give this smile. I'm like, yeah, you know, a swim sounds delightful. And I didn't allow myself room for second guessing. And I took no small amount of pride in the fact that my fingers didn't tremble. So I don't know. There's a little bit of, you know, the whole like fake it till you make it thing in here. But really, I think it's just a conscious choice of who she wants to be. And I love seeing her take a step in that direction.
Yeah. I struggle. I struggle with this scene only because it triggers stuff from my own life.
Oh no.
Yeah, I know. But like, there was this golden-haired person I lost my virginity to who I had this scene actually happen in my life at the ocean. And I was like, no. And he was like, we don't need swimsuits. And I was like, I did exactly this. And I didn't know him well. And I was like, I'm just going to go for it. And pulled off my clothes and jumped in the ocean right there at Santa Monica. Just went. I'd been in LA for like 2 weeks maybe. Ay, Dios mío. So yeah, but it's yeah.
Okay, so I'm looking at this scene. I'm like, oh, this is like super cute of her stepping out, and you're like,
scene. And I'm like,
not.
If she was gonna do it, I'm like, just okay, then just take off your clothes and jump in, because I'm not there with her where I'm like, let me slowly take off my clothes and then slowly let his eyes rove down then up me as if he's dead. I'm like, just jump in. Just jump there. Come on. What? I'm not there with her yet. Like, she's way too comfortable here for my liking, for me and my past and my bringing myself into the page.
This, by the way, though, is why, like, as part of this podcast, where like every time we post an episode inside of our community, you know, we post the video and then we're like, these are some of our thoughts and I'll tell you some of ours, because it's not like a teaching. It's not like this is, you know, for any chapter we pull out 2 or 3 things that like we had some thoughts on. But this is so fascinating because like even within the same passage, it's impacting people differently. And I think what we're wanting is for people to simply use this as an opportunity to be with themselves and like ask questions and consider things where like, you know, I'm reading this passage and I'm like, you know, because I'm in such a season right now of, well, right now, for quite a while, of learning to take up space. And, you know, I identify so much with this idea of like getting embarrassed, like this, you know, 2 pages ago where it's like somebody presents like, hey, do you want to do this thing? It's like, nope. And like shrinking back. Yeah. And then that conscious choice to be visible and like metaphorically being naked, like metaphorically being seen, you know, for me, it was such like a powerful moment. But then to hear like, okay, so, you know, for you though, it triggers a very literal memory of seeing how this is not.
This is so familiar.
I mean, it's like, but that's the thing, like it's why I like studying, why I love the idea of as a group looking at a fiction novel as opposed to a nonfiction self-help book, because it creates that space for each person to, you know, it's like, you know, modern art, it's like abstract art, it's like what comes up for you.
Yeah.
That's super interesting. So like where I'm like, go Feyre, you're like, girl, quit it.
No, I'm not. I mean, I stick with my decisions to do what I did back then. It's just, it's not without a bit of, and for her, I'm like, I couldn't have done, I mean, I didn't do this where she's just confidently or pretend confidently, just standing there as his eyes are roving all over every inch, every curve of me. That gaze alone stripped me bare. So
Yeah.
and then his eyes met mine, and he gave me a lazy smile before removing his clothes. I just would have jumped in the water so fast. Like that would have been enough bravery. That's huge that she did that at all. But she's got much bigger balls than me, Feyre. But then again, she's been hunting for years and keeping her family alive. She has to have some pretty big balls. So
Yeah.
there she goes. I'm glad she's having fun doing something much more fun than hunting.
Well, and I think, it's this is one of those places where, it was funny. My daughter asked me the other day, she's like, didn't you say this is like there's like sex in this book? And I was like, yeah. She's like, she was like, how are you going to deal with that on the podcast? I was like, metaphorically is how we're going to deal with it. because there are things where, like, when you actually get into, if you try to, look at this really literally, I think so much of it does get into personal values and and as opposed to, like, to each their own. And it's not my job to judge or decide what's right for another person. Anyway, so I typically, when we get to these scenes or when I think about it, like in the podcast, it's always very metaphorical to me. So I'm like, the idea of like what do I actually think about that between them? I'm like, I don't know. But metaphorically, the idea of, can I be vulnerable, right? Like, can I take down some of my armor? Can I let my true self be seen? Which honestly, I think is, it's part of what we're doing in this podcast to a degree. It's part of what we're doing in a group to a deeper degree. It's always been part of how I've taught and coached. But to let ourselves be seen and not shy away. And I think what I liked about this was, I think it reminded me, like, a lot of times when I see people who are vulnerable or they seem confident, I think, again, I want to put it in black and white. Like, I know my internal world, and I know that my thoughts aren't always confident. And I'm like, either you're not confident or you are. And I'm like, no, it's actually a spectrum. And there are people who they are confident, but it's not 100% thing. And like, there may be some of that where they had to work before they showed up to manage their own thinking. And like, I don't know whether or not they're going to have a self-conscious moment afterwards. Like, and I can't compare what's happening inside of me to what I can see with another person. And I've done speaking events where I was like scared out of my mind before I spoke, and then was like completely in my head about it for days afterwards. But I've actually had people say, like, oh my goodness, can I work with you? Because I could just see from the way you were speaking that you had so much confidence, and I think I need that. And I'm like, oh, that's so interesting. Because it's not like I don't, but it's also not that black and white. It's like, do I have confidence? Like, in some things, yes, and in others, not. And in some places, I'm okay with being seen. In some places, I'm not. And again, like, letting it be complex. But this, for me, where it's like, metaphorically, she's letting down her guard and letting herself be seen, but it's not 100% confident. It's not without my stomach is kind of flipping over right now.
Yeah.
And I'm still going to do this, and I'm still going to take action. And it helped me feel permission to, like, right, it's not one or the other. It can be a little messy.
Yeah.
Metaphorical nakedness.
Metaphorical nakedness.
But
he's
back
metaphorically hungry and feral.
Not so much. But then there's also that
gleam in his eye.
So I love this enough so that I had to look anywhere but at his face, which then is his chest and his arms and his legs. And I love this. We have this comparison. Like, he wasn't built like Isaac.
Isaac had been gangly.
Yep.
In that awkward place between a boy and a man, but nope. Tamlin's glorious body was honed by centuries of fighting and brutality.
Oh,
there we go. The liquid was delightfully warm.
There we go. We'll switch back to that. Which leads into, like, more conversation about them getting to know each other, and so it's like, who taught you how to swim? Oh my gosh, this experience.
This is a crazy story how she learned how to swim, taught herself how to swim from watching the kids swim and then jumping in and kind of drowning a bit and saving her own life.
And that's what she said. It was like one of the most terrifying experiences of my life. I swallowed half the pond in the process. But I'd gotten the gist of it, managed to conquer my blind panic and terror and trust myself. Ooh, okay, now that though.
Trusting herself at a very young age.
And that it came through doing something where she felt panic and terror and moved through it and was able to get to that place where she could trust her body.
I love this. Knowing how to submit seemed like a vital ability, one that might someday mean the difference between life and death. I never expected it would lead to this, though. That would have been impossible, Feyre, for you to ever have any idea that you would have this moment where you're out at this glen in the middle of this magical place with this half man, half beast, and you're in a pool of starlight. You're going to want to know how to swim. So be sure to teach yourself that real quick while you're young.
Yeah. Which then, okay, so then we have this conversation about how her father lost her fortune, him being the prince of merchants. We use all of this. We're talking, and there's a lot more that we don't hear, but what we know is, she says, he ends with what else did you figure out for herself? And she's like, and I smiled and I told him about all those years in the woods. So they have this beautiful moment where
getting to know each other conversation.
Yeah. And so then, did you have any more on that part? Because then we move into this.
Just that.
Just that part.
Exactly that.
And then this last chapter, this is a callback to what we actually talked about before. So so Tamlin and Feyre are talking about Lucien, and she's already got to this place where she's like, what he did wasn't okay, but I understand how he got to there. And then they get to have a conversation where they actually kind of clear the air, which and that's the thing, I think her having some context before they have this conversation was really helpful, because if they hadn't had this, who knows how that would have gone. And it's funny where she's kind of seems more okay than he thinks that she ought to be, and he even asks, he's like, you can't possibly forgive me that easily for sending you into danger,
when he had not given her completely accurate information about how to trap the cereal.
Right. So and that's what this is, referring back to. She's like, I never got to thank you for your advice with the cereal. But if you want me dead, you might need to try a little bit harder. He's like, that's not what I intended, but I also wouldn't shed any tears. But she lets him know that she was kind of teasing. He's like, you can't possibly forgive me. And she's like, no. And this is back to that same conversation where she's not at this place of forgiving, or at least not forgetting. She's like, and a part of me would like nothing more than to wallop you for your lack of warning. But I understand. And she comes back to this place of, I get it. I'm a human who killed your friend, who now lives in your house, and you have to deal with me. I understand. And it's not even totally accurate, but again, it comes back to that place where she's not excusing what he did. She's just saying, I'm at a place where I can understand your actions better. And for her, that's enough. It's enough for her to understand that.
Yeah. And then he has a little bit of shift, or reveals that he's had a little bit of shift towards her, because he says, Tam told me that your first shot was to save the cereal's life, not your own. Yeah. And she's just it seemed like the right thing to do. So that for him is
yeah, so
she's not as bad as I thought either.
Yeah, he's also having this shift as he views her, because he's like, I know far too many high fae and lesser fears who wouldn't have bothered. And he has this moment of, I heard you scream and I hesitated. Not long, but I hesitated. Yeah. And then, which, by the way, I do find this interesting that he still didn't say sorry. He's just here's a hunting knife.
Yeah.
Okay.
I owe you one, basically. Here's a beautiful jeweled hunting knife.
So we need to go back
now
and...
we're even Stevens.
It's hey, can you go back and listen to the episode about apology languages? Because I don't think give somebody a knife is one of them.
If anybody has Lucian's personal number, let me know, and I will just send him a link to that podcast.
We'll send him that article on...
Yeah,
there's
graphic with the 5 types.
There's 5 options here. Give somebody a hunting knife is not one of them, but...
Or maybe we should send that option to the author of the 5 forgiveness languages and see if they want to add that. Number 6, give someone a jeweled hunting knife.
Number 6, just give a knife. But I love it. He's like, don't bury it in my back.
Yeah.
Good one. All right, friends, that's chapter 18.
Thank you so much for joining us here on our podcast. And we hope that you will also join us, if you haven't already, at ACOTAR, ACOTAA.circle, where you can dive in and become a real juicy part of our community, where we rely on you and your feedback to help shape where this whole adventure is going, because we don't know yet. It's a grand mystery. Thanks, guys.
We'll see you there. Bye.